Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for January 5th, 2024. I'm Benji Fisher moderating, and also here are Ralph Kohler, who's sharing his screen, and we'll start off the discussion, and Emma Harrell, Arthur Schall, and Simo Helston. So go ahead, Ralph.
Thank you. A few days ago, Angry Toast brought up, just to load again.
I can read the issue number 2811043.
Yep, thank you. File formatter render absolute URL to file. It's basically about the following. I go into that one. Yep. On manage display, you added the following formatting option: URL to image as well as file. That way it is adding basically just the following checkbox: render as absolute URL. If checked, links will be rendered as absolute URLs. And that way, to illustrate the functionality, I've left for images the checkbox unchecked, while for files I've kept it checked. And that way you can see without being checked, you get the output: sites, default files, styles, white, public, and the file name. While for files, you get the whole HTTPS, then the top level domain, and the rest of the path you had before in the relative one. That is basically the functionality that is being added. And I can quickly pull up the chat. The points in question, the strings in questions, usability review was requested for is render as absolute URL and render as relative URL, and if checked, links will be rendered as absolute URLs, the description. And yeah, the questions were: the newly added strings uses URL in lowercase. It looks like the preferred style is either URL capitalized or URLs. And regarding the comment, also, I don't think that render is used in the Drupal UI that was brought up in the comments. What's recommended in that case? I see that the link field formatter uses show URL as plain text does. If checked, links will show, or more active show as absolute URL work. Those were the questions.
Okay, so slow down a second.
Yep.
So if I understand correctly, this issue is about giving the same options for images that we already have for files when rendering the image as a URL. Is that right?
I can't exactly remember. I can quickly unapply the patch, and we can take a look how it looks like without the patch applied.
Okay, or you could use the site I've prepared.
That way, okay.
Let me put the link in the Zoom chat, and anyone can log into this one as usual with username and password of admin. So maybe the patch, or maybe the issue is adding options both to image and files, because if the options are already there for files, then I assume we would just want to use the same interface text for images that we already use for files.
I have to quickly add a file. Oops, let's take it there. File. Oops.
Does anyone else have questions at this point? Want to clarify what the issue is about?
article content, add content, article.
I agree. I think it would make sense for it to be the same treatment for documents with images, but I'm just not that familiar with what that is.
Window box. No, there is no option. You have basically you have the URL to file option already. Oops, I can quickly also add the other one as well, but creating file from image. Yep. Yeah, that's right. Basically, the checkbox is not available. Render is absolutely rare. You always output the relative one without a patch applied. As you can see, no checkbox.
Okay, so this is a new option for both files and
Yep.
images.
Yep.
Okay, so it's new interface text. We can't simply use what's already there. Okay. And so the questions at this point are all about the interface text.
Yeah, the main question was the interface text.
So
at the moment it is.
I don't know if it's like, I'm just thinking if people are aware of what is the difference of what would happen if I have a dev side and I decide to use absolutes and then I use the live side, if people are aware of the consequences.
like we'll get my site dev.com/sites default files, whatever. It's on the dev site, and we'll get mysite.com/sites default files if we do it
I'm
on the live
assuming
site.
today everything is relative, so it's always about where is your server right now, what's hosting, and with this one, all of a sudden you'll have new, perhaps unexpected result if you didn't know what you were doing or what was that you change.
Okay. Ralph, go ahead.
And one additional point going in a similar direction is, per default, you have the render as relative URL. And as you can see here, you have that statement render as relative URL. But if you go inside, there's no option in regards of relative URL. It's basically hidden in the unchecked state. It's render as relative URL. And maybe an option in a pattern we've used on different issues before is, instead of a checkbox, use two radio buttons in that regard, and maybe add examples after each, what it actually means to have, for example, render as absolute URL selected or render as relative URL, to make it more clear to the user.
I was thinking of that too. Arthur, go ahead.
I don't know if it's our place to ask this or raise that, but are there enough benefits to make that change? Because I'm not sure what are the use cases of when would I wanna have that option, or how many people out of websites out there need it in core to have that option?
That's a good point. Certainly a field formatter is something that can be added by a contrib module. And I think that's not our primary purpose, that we should mostly focus on usability, but it's certainly something we can raise.
Yeah, like in a way, I'm coming at it from usability. We're adding complexity of here's another question, another something to choose. But is it something that most websites need, or most website, like I don't think I ever needed it. But I'm looking for what are the use cases of why it's important to add it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think it's adding too much clutter to the interface, because until you select it from the drop-down list of formatters, you don't see all the options available to it. So it's really just adding one more item to the list of formats you can use to display. But it might be worth looking at the use cases. Go ahead, Simo.
Yeah, I actually needed this kind of thing with some with a site that kind of exports stuff like in JSON through JSON API, and I think what I see here is that something where it actually helps. So I kind of had to jump through some hoops to get it working before. So yeah, and so I think it could, with JSON, it can be sometimes useful. In that case, it was because they needed something to kind of to catch the URLs to rewrite some stuff or something like that. So it wasn't really nice implementation anyways. So it's kind of a hack anyway. But I think with JSON stuff, this can be quite actually useful. But another thing I was thinking, where does it get the domain? Because I have one site with instructions for teachers and students, and the site uses a domain module that kind of, so that part of the stuff is using one URL for students, and part of the site is part of the content is using another domain for teachers. So in that kind of cases, I don't know, maybe it didn't come up where it gets the URL. So is it from site settings, or where does it come from? So that's something that can cause some complexity with certain contribute modules, especially with domain. But then probably things will work just as before when it renders relative URL like it did before. But I think I can see that with certain cases where you get stuff from JSON API, this can be useful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that Drupal has some aspirations to being API first, and not just a builder of web pages, but also a builder of APIs. And in that context, I think this feature makes a lot of sense. As for whether it works or how it works, that's not really a usability question, but if you could test the current patch with the site using the domain module and see, then I think that would be a really useful comment for the issue. But I wouldn't consider it part of usability. Author, go ahead.
I think that was a misunderstanding on my part. My question is this patch saving in the database absolute URLs, or it's all about the display itself that allow absolute URLs?
Oh, I'm pretty sure it's just a formatter. I don't think it's changing anything in the database.
Okay, yeah. So spark some of my previous comments because I thought it's somehow going to cause issues, but if it's just for the display, much better.
Okay. Yeah, the issue summary does say that there are no API changes and no data model changes. So, Ralph, go ahead.
And one other detail when I've tested it is the following. As you can see, I have an image, a media item, and a file, but on the output, as well as you can see here, for media items, you have no option for URL to file, and I wonder if it would make sense to make it on par either in a follow-up issue or within that one issue, because with a media module, in particular for pages just built on Drupal 9 or 10 without being migrated, many pages might mainly use the media module, and for those it would be also useful, I imagine.
I disagree there because I think that in that case, you would add a view mode for your media type that uses the URL formatter. And then you would just have to select that view mode in the check in the drop-down list you're looking at now. And yeah, that's sort of a fundamental problem with the media module, which is that there's this, it introduces an extra level of indirection that you have to deal with anytime you're dealing with something like this. So if you want a particular image size for your image media, you have to create the view mode on the media and then select it here. And it would be the same thing with this URL formatter.
Okay.
So for the specific questions asked, one is easy to answer. Yes, URL should be capitalized, all caps in the interface text. And I guess there's an additional question about whether to use sort of active or passive text. And then there's the question of whether to use a single checkbox or two radio buttons. Is there anything else that we've been asked to look at?
No.
So let's think first about the question of which widget to use, whether we should have a radio button or I'm sorry, whether we should have a single checkbox or two radio buttons. Will there ever be a third option? Because that would be an argument for using radio buttons. And I guess the advantages of two radio buttons is that we could, in the description text, give examples for each. And then also the text of the radio button would be the summary text when the options are collapsed. Any advantages to using the single checkbox?
Ralph, did you say that they use radio buttons on something similar elsewhere? So if that's a pattern elsewhere, I think it makes sense to replicate it here.
At least I vaguely remember that on one of the or two of previous issues we've discussed, we've moved away from checkboxes towards radio buttons, but I can't remember from the top of my head the exact issue numbers right now. I would have to search.
Okay.
We have talked about it in kind of this visibility, like block visibility. That's one place we talked about that. And then there were also some others, but I think with block visibility, it's two options that are usually there. Some other cases where we discussed about that, I don't remember which one, but it was possible that there would be other options as well.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
especially a good idea. We've come across some issues where there's a single checkbox and then there's some long convoluted description text that explains what will happen if you do or don't select the checkbox. And that sort of situation is really drastically simplified if you have two radio buttons with 2 bits of description text rather than one checkbox. I think it's less compelling here, although I do like the advantage of being able to use the label on the radio button as the summary text.
Yeah,
So-
because that makes it plain what absolute is and what relative is, so people can see. Because I think that would be a good idea.
And I also like Ralph's suggestion of using the description text to give an example to make it sort of crystal clear what we mean by relative and what we mean by absolute. So do we have consensus on changing to radio buttons? I get a thumbs up from Simo and from Emma and Ralph, and I agree. Okay, I'll call that a consensus. Okay, and then Ralph, can you remind us what were the options being considered for the text?
At the moment, apologies. At the moment, the text is rendered as absolute URL. If checked, links will be rendered as absolute URLs. That is the current suggestion. For the
Okay,
checkbox.
that is a perfect example of useless help text, right?
Yep.
It doesn't add any information that's not already in the checkbox label. And it would be much more useful to give an example of how it would be rendered.
The only worry I would have is if you make each radio button label render as absolute URL and render as
Relative.
relative URL, then you have a redundancy with render as, and maybe it would make sense to have a title like render and then as, and then absolute URL and relative URL, and then the description maybe. But that way it gets a bit more wordy, but not sure.
And that also loses the using the same text for the radio button as for the summary text. And if we look at the other examples of summary text, the rendered entity for the media, it's rendered as default. So I think it's probably a good idea to be consistent with that.
So you mean basically like that? Still?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay. That way, it's basically you have to scan 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 characters until the interesting part starts before it's redundant, and that's the problematic detail.
Do we have a default way of like just putting down an example? Like my site / or something like that that we've used elsewhere that anyone knows of?
Well, I think we should probably use example.com rather than my site.
Yeah.
Well, I've given my opinion, but you know, that's, yeah, maybe we should take a vote. Do we want render as a heading for the two options, and then that people won't have to scan over 2 words to find the difference between relative and absolute? Or should we include render as part of the text of the for the radio button? So who likes Ralph's suggestion of putting render as only once as the label for the option field? I'm not seeing any thumbs up, not even from Ralph. Who likes the idea of the text as written? Oh, I'm seeing a great lack of opinions. Ralph, could you go back to the settings page and look at some of the other examples?
Yeah.
So I guess for the media, can you open up the options there? So here it's view mode is default, and then the summary text is render as default. If you were to change that to full content, it would be rendered as full content.
Oh.
And the ID doesn't have any options.
Oops, I wasn't. Oh, I was late. That's a bit more. Should I check anything else?
Yeah, could you reload the page? Did someone added the IMG field? Someone added file
On the other
misspelled.
page. That was me.
Yeah, so look at the um click update for the IMGG field and see what gets in the summary text. It just says original image. It doesn't say rendered as. So maybe in the summary text we shouldn't even have text render as. Maybe that's redundant. So should we go with the principle that less is more and make the summary text just absolute URL or relative URL? Again, I'm not seeing a lot of opinions. I'm getting a thumbs up from Ralph for less is more.
I think that would make sense.
Okay, and Simo gives the thumbs up as well. Okay. I like following the less is more principle. So then I guess we have a recommendation, don't we?
But one question, is also the verb render correct? That was also the question on the issue. Could be maybe output or something like that be clearer? Because people wondered what render does imply and communicate.
How about a simple word like show? Show the link as option 1 absolute URL, option 2 relative URL. Or
I think that would make sense. I mean, I'm seeing there it's used against media image rendered entity, but I think that means something a bit different to what we're talking about. So I agree that I don't think render is quite the right word. So show is simpler.
I think,
I
yeah,
think better alternative.
Usually rendered kind of it kind of feels like it should have templates you can edit or something like that.
good point. Ralph, do you want to bring up that little text edit window you had?
Pardon?
You want to
Yeah,
open that text edit window that we were looking at?
I have it in my on my other screen. I was in
Yeah.
in my thoughts. Sorry. Should it be that way or that way?
Yeah, I think we've agreed on the first one.
Okay.
And then the summary text will match the radio button options with the less is more principle.
And in regards of the description, underneath, should examples be added?
Yeah, and I think the only question is whether to have a static example using www.example.com or whether the description text should show what will actually render for the current site.
the dynamic variant would be nicer from my perspective, if that is possible easily.
Yeah, I agree. And then also for the file path, I think again, less is more. Instead of demo/mytestimage.png, I would just make it files/image.png.
And would it make sense to add something like outputs?
Or example.
For example.
I was thinking instead of outputs, for example, I was thinking just example :
Yeah. Less is more. Oh, better.
I would use a colon rather than a comma.
Oh, a colon.
Do people like that? Are there suggestions? Get a thumbs up from Emma. Okay, and thumbs up from Pete, Sumo, and Ralph. Great. So are we done here? Anything else to say?
I think good to go here.
What's that?
I think we're good. We are good to go here. So
Okay. And you'll add the comment for us?
yep, I will.
Thank you. All right, so are we ready to look at the issue about selecting field types, or is that something we should try to look at next week?
I'm ready for
Okay.
that. I have that. I don't have a link to share, so it's only a local instance. And I don't have my ngrok account set up, so but I can share my screen.
Okay, and if you want to use the link I pasted that shows that's a site without the patch applied, so you can compare with the current status. So go ahead and share your screen, and this is issue 3389200.
Yeah.
Link in the Zoom chat.
Yeah. So the field selection breaks conventions and increases cognitive load is the label. So the issue here was that there is things are displayed in the same single form, these options, and the kind of linked options are quite far away from each other. So that was the main issue. Now it's the change that has been made is splitting it into two forms, so making it 2 steps. I have here umami set up with this patch applied, and when I click create new field, I first get this form for selecting type of field, and the second screen is for label and selecting options. So I don't know if it's in the scope, but actually I noticed that when creating content, we have add content, and the form that follows is called add content. But here we have a link, create a new field, and the form that opens is add field. So that's kind of that seems a little bit out of place.
Yeah, I would call that out of scope. And
Yeah.
I've actually been working pretty hard encouraging the team working on this to have properly scoped images. So let's not add that to this issue.
Yeah, but it's related to something else I noticed, because when I click here, add field, I click Boolean, the form, it still says add field, and it says label, but it doesn't tell anymore that I'm not in the breadcrumbs either. So it's only in the URL that it says that I'm adding a Boolean. So it would be nice to have here in the add field it mentioning, updating that you're adding a Boolean, because it's not mentioned anywhere else on this form. So to show us to show the user that you are adding a Boolean field, because the form is exactly the same as with email or with, I think, link.
Right.
So this doesn't have any difference in the fields. So if I'm here editing body field, it says body settings for article. So there are use cases where it mentions the field type and the content type.
Yeah, and there's already an issue open that will change how that works, so that when you have a simple field like email with no options, it'll skip the form with a single label and go directly to the field settings form.
Yeah.
Ralph, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, that one, and the other detail, the steps, as soon as the dialog modal is introduced, there's also another follow-up issue for indicating the steps, though step 1, then step 2, and that you always have the correct context instead of the uniform add field, like you pointed out, Simo. So that is also already open.
Yeah, so let's stick to the scope of the current issue.
Yeah.
So I think your first point was that these options should not be checkboxes. I'm sorry, should not be radio buttons as they were before.
Yeah.
And it looks like they no longer are. So
that's fixed. And also, when I choose an option here, I can immediately see that what the next step is and where the change is. So it's not something that it's not out of the view, outside the viewport or anything like that. So even if I move it, make it like this, so I can't see everything, and then I add a number, I can see that there is stuff that is changing. So this is obvious that there are other steps here and where the options are. So there is no content hidden, and it's not too far away, and kind of, so it kind of fixes the issues. So the choosing plain text and choosing the option, it's not too far apart. And that's kind of the main point. And also it's not confusing to have these radio button things here. So yeah. I'd say that's fixes the issues, and and the other issues have already follow-up issues.
okay. So yeah, I really did want to get your opinion on this because you opened this issue. And again, on the discussion of scope, this issue was originally closed, and they said, "Oh, we'll deal with that on this other issue," which had unreasonable scope. And I reopened this issue when I tried to avoid having monolithic issues with poorly managed scope.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if you look at my site, which does not yet have this patch applied, you'll see that some of those changes have already been made. That it's already a two-step form. And this issue is about changing from radio buttons to, I guess, links. And that's a pretty well managed scope. Ralph, go ahead.
Oh, Simo's already doing what I wanted to ask him, if he could open the same on your page and to see it next to each other. That would be helpful. Thank you.
So this still has the radio buttons, and it's a pretty unusual use of radio buttons. But it does separate it into the two steps. So yeah, here are the changes. On this page, we see them side by side. And after the patch is applied, they'll be vertically aligned. So the radio buttons line up.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is also sort of usually they are in line. So we can scan them. That's not really useful here, but if you look at so important there, but when you look at, let's say, where was it, reference? So this one kind of here it's just kind of makes perfect sense to have them like on top of each other instead of so this is kind of for me this kind of illustrates the reason why we want to have them.
Right, and that grid was especially confusing for keyboard navigation.
Yeah.
Having them vertically aligned it takes up more room. There's all of this wasted space. But on the other hand, the navigation is crystal clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. If we have this page at all, it should say have more information than add field. I think at this point that should be a very easy change to make, but it's not part of this issue.
Yeah.
Any other comments on this, or can we just give a thumbs up to it? Ralph?
Oh, yeah. Minor nitpick in regards of layout. If you compare the page before with the current one, no, if you go onto the back button, please. Yeah, on here you have the titles like plain text, formatted text in bolded compared to the description in a less weighted font size. While on the next page, when you see the options, text plain and the bullet points underneath have the same font weight. And I wonder if it would make sense to let them stand out slightly more and make them also with a bigger font weight, similar to the page before. Oops.
Okay, opinions on that? Should the first line of radio button, I guess this is what exactly is this structure? Thank you. so that list is a separate div from where it says text plain. No, you're confusing me. What are you experimenting with?
Yeah, I'm looking what it would look like if it would be a smaller size compared to the. So here text plain has now smaller size for the description compared to the option, and the text plain long has the same size, so same style for both description and the option. So there is a slight size contrast.
And on the previous page, was there
It
a
was
font weight
size.
difference?
I think it was size and color,
Okay.
text size and color.
Or it's just color. For me, it looked more like a font weight as well. That is
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Here it looks like, to me, it looks like it's the same weight, but it's color. So it kind of looks like weight.
Okay.
Well, what we only have a few more minutes left. So whatever it is, it should be consistent, I think. Is that if we use
Yeah.
font size and color, or if it's font weight, whatever it is on this page, we should use the same distinction on the following page.
Yeah.
Does that seem like a good idea to everyone?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thumbs up from Emma. Okay. So Sima, would you like to make that suggestion on the issue?
Yeah, I can do that.
And I guess maybe we should also look at the keyboard navigation, or should we leave that to the accessibility review? Because I'm pretty sure this is still marked. Actually, this isn't marked for an accessibility review. Maybe it should be. In fact, I'm pretty sure it should get an accessibility review as well. I'm getting a thumbs up from Ralph. So is that tabbing through the options?
Yeah, tapping through these arrows, not moving. Here it's just normal navigation with arrows. Like this is radio buttons. And here it's not confusing because left and right, when it's in one like one line, this one column, these radio buttons, it's kind of clear that left and right and up and down do the same, because that's kind of expected from radio buttons. So it doesn't create the same confusion. So with a quick check, the keyboard navigation is improved. So it's more, it doesn't seem to have surprises.
Okay, so needs work for changing.
Yeah, so no, with the new version, with the patch applied, the keyboard navigation is as expected, I think. So here the difference is that arrow keys don't move the selection, but tab and shift tab, they do. So it's, the question is if they should work with arrow keys as well. But at least it doesn't work in unexpected way. So arrow keys just don't work. They don't move in the kind of confusing directions.
Okay, so probably that needs some further attention.
Yeah.
Okay,
And we did, yeah. And one of the issues was if screen reader reads that description text, and that's something that definitely is accessibility review.
okay, so we are at the top of the hour. I think those are good points. I think it was premature to market RTBC. But let's try to help get this issue properly done. I think that'll be a big improvement. And thank you all for coming. Happy New Year all, and we'll be back next week. And I think I have to drop because I have another meeting I have to go to at work.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice
See
See you
weekend.
soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.